Welcome back, honeys. I hope you're prepared for a whole new round of buzz. This week, we're breaking down September 7th through the 13th, everything from the arts world that came up that you need to know about. For those of you wondering about or keeping track of how my women's rugby team is doing this year, we lost our game Saturday against Oconomowoc 51-30, which admittedly was not the result we were hoping for with our 72-5 win the week prior, but such is life. As the saying goes, you win some, you lose some. With a quick reminder that our sources are always available via the doc linked in the episode description, we'll go ahead and get started on these headlines. First things first, our follow-ups. We learned last week that Marilyn Monroe's home will stay standing. The New York Times reported that Los Angeles Superior Court Judge James C. Chalfant denied a petition to demolish the former home of the American icon and actress Marilyn Monroe. The decision ends, therefore, a 2-year legal battle between the property owners, Bryna Milstein and Roy Bank, and the city. When headlines announced Milstein and Bank's plans to tear down Monroe's house in order to combine the lot with their adjacent property, public uproar ensued, as did a successful motion to name the home a city historic cultural monument. This legal decision maintains that designation. As LA City Council member Tracy Park previously argued, quote, to lose this piece of history, the only home that Marilyn Monroe ever owned, would be a devastating blow for the historic preservation and for a city where less than 3% of historic designations are associated with women's heritage, unquote. That is why we've decided to feature this story. We also learned that the Woodmere Art Museum has dropped its lawsuit against the Trump administration over the unlawful termination of a $750,000 grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as the grant was recently restored. From the reporting by our sources, we learned that Woodmere had requested the IMLS review its grant termination prior to taking legal action. The museum confirmed to our sources that its grant was restored ahead of the court date scheduled for Friday, September 12th, via a letter of reinstatement of the grant on September 4th. That letter did reference the review and said the reinstatement superseded any previous grant notices. The Woodmere's director and CEO, William Valerio, said publicly, quote, we are thrilled to receive the news that the IMLS has reinstated this important grant, and we look forward to the critical work of preserving, conserving, and stewarding Woodmere's collection for the benefit of the public, end quote. The why we care here is that even though some grants, like this one, have been reinstated, many others who lost their grant funding through the IMLS are still looking for ways to cover or adapt to their unexpected funding losses. Meanwhile, a potentially fake Liu Fan painting became the center of a political bribery investigation in South Korea. The special prosecutor leading the case against Kim Kyon-hee, wife of South Korea's impeached and jailed former president Yoon Suk-yeol, said on Thursday that a painting by Liu Fan is now at the center of the inquiry into alleged corruption in the former First Lady's circle. The case's prosecutors allege that a former prosecutor, Kim Sang-min, purchased Lee's from point number 800298 in 2023 for around 100 million won, or about $75,000 on behalf of Kim Kyon-hee's brother, Kim Jin-woo. The investigation therefore aims to figure out whether that transaction was connected to political favors, most importantly, Kim Sang-min's bid for a ruling party nomination in the 2024 general elections, and his later appointment as a legal advisor to the National Intelligence Service. Kim Sang-min denied receiving any bribes or favors and claims that he acted only as an intermediary at Jin-woo's request, quote, because if it leaked that the Kim Kyon-hee, Kim Jin-woo family was buying the painting, its price could easily increase by at least 2 to 3 times, end quote. But the biggest twist of this story was revealed just after news of the bribery investigation's inclusion of the artwork. South Korea's newspaper of record, Chosun Ilbo, reported last week that 2 Korean art appraisers have reached conflicting conclusions about the painting's authenticity. We'll keep you posted as this story develops. Last week also saw the Independent Art Fair partnering with Sotheby's, raising larger market questions. Both entities announced a multi-year collaboration on September 8th, which seems to hinge on the Brewer Building, the 5-story brutalist structure on Madison Avenue that for decades served as the home of the Whitney Museum of American Art. Artforum wrote, quote, both entities perceive its stark, nearly windowless confines as a sales-enhancing setting for the artworks each is peddling, end quote. The agreement still seems to have distinct boundaries, though, quote, while the alliance with Sotheby's underscores a changing art landscape, Independent stressed its autonomy many inner quotes, Sotheby's will not have any curatorial voice within our exhibitions, end all quotes. The obvious question, what's in it for each of them? Said Madeline Listener, Sotheby's global head of fine art, to the New York Times, the collaboration aligns with its push to reposition its buildings as cultural venues rather than auction-only sites. Sotheby's will move into the building this November, then beginning in 2026, switch to hosting its independent 20th Century Art Fair at Sotheby's Brewer Building headquarters in Manhattan. Meanwhile, the Independent will gain a larger space for its own fair, founded in 2022, and which will also roughly double in size to include more than 50 galleries, according to Hyperallergic. Independent 20th Century is known for spotlighting overlooked as well as celebrated artists of the last century, with curatorial programming that focuses on reinterpreting movements from women in surrealism to Arab modernism, so this increase in space is a win for them as well. But we're paying attention to this story, honeys, because the deal is the first of its kind to be struck between a major auction house and a large art fair operator. Our sources agree that this partnership reflects the significant recent shifts in the way that contemporary art is found, bought, and sold, quote, as well as changes in the art market's fortunes, as the past 12 months alone have seen the cancellation or postponement of 4 major art fairs and year-over-year decreases in art sales at blue-chip auction houses, end quote. We were also made aware last week that the vast array of emergency foreign trade tariffs that Trump imposed back in April has heightened the sense of the art market's uncertainty during one of its busiest sales seasons. Our sources note that artworks have largely been exempt from the new duties because they, along with photographs, posters, publications, and other media, are generally categorized as cultural and informational materials under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Still, several international galleries faced unanticipated costs from reciprocal tariffs at last week's fairs, depending on the type of object they shipped and what method they used to send it. Some galleries were forced to absorb new taxes on furniture, ceramics, jewelry, and other sorts of pieces less easily categorized as artworks. For example, the SMAC Gallery, a Cape Town art space, which had to pay a 15% fee on a small wooden table and 2 matching chairs that the gallery specifically had made for their exhibition booth. And other galleries that did not have to pay duties, mainly European ones, still faced the extra burden of reassuring buyers that their purchases had no hidden charges. Our sources write, quote, Astrid Engstrom, business director for the London and Baku-based Gazeli Art House, believes that widespread anxiety over tariff policy has dampened sales this year, end quote. Which brings us to the why we care. The future of tariffs on art and other materials will remain unclear until sometime this fall, when the Supreme Court is set to make a ruling on Trump's trade duties, but the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, told NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday of last week that if the court finds the reciprocal tariffs were an overreach, the federal government could even issue rebates. So a ton is up in the air right now in the art world in regards to sales and tariffs. We also heard that an Ohio auction of 2 Dutch paintings of flowers looted by Nazis was halted by a foundation. The Columbus Dispatch, first to report the news, says the 5-inch by 8-inch oil-on-copper images of flowers and vases are believed to have been painted by Dutch artist Ambrosius Bosschaert, who lived 1573 to 1621. They were on track to be sold by Apple Tree Auction Center in New York, Ohio, as part of a sale of unclaimed items from safety deposit boxes, until research by the Monuments Men and Women Foundation, as well as the Jewish Digital Cultural Recovery Project, discovered that the 2 paintings were originally part of the art collection of Adolphe and Lucie Haast Schloss. The French Jewish family's collection of 333 paintings were, quote, hunted down, seized, and divvied up by Nazi officials and their French collaborators in 1943, unquote, per our sources. The sale of both and the information about them was removed from the auction house's website after the foundation contacted Apple Tree about the paintings' provenance and matching information on the Recovery Project's website. The founder of the Monuments Men and Women Foundation, Robert Edsel, says, quote, having stopped the sale, our focus is now to determine the consignor, go to them, and get them to voluntarily turn over custody to us temporarily, to then return them to the Schloss family, end quote. Last week also saw thousands of filmmakers pledge to boycott Israeli cinema institutions. Over 3,500 film industry workers and visual artists, including Brian Eno, Nan Golden, and Sky Hopinka, have joined a boycott of Israeli film institutions that they allege are, quote, implicated in genocide and apartheid against the Palestinian people, end quote. The pledge was published on September 8th by the activist group Film Workers for Palestine. The group has previously organized protest actions against the film industry's complicity with the Israeli military's ongoing assault on Palestinians, which, I'll repeat, has been classified as a genocide by human rights groups, the UN, and Israeli organizations. hands. The Filmworkers for Palestine campaign draws inspiration from the Filmmakers United Against Apartheid boycott founded in 1987 by directors Jonathan Demme and Martin Scorsese, and which attempted to dissuade the United States film industry from distributing work in South Africa as part of the international anti-apartheid movement. British Palestinian filmmaker Farah Nabulsi, who also signed the pledge, told Hyperallergic, quote, "Just as cultural boycotts played a crucial role in challenging apartheid South Africa, we too must refuse to normalize or collaborate with institutions complicit in Israel's ongoing genocide, apartheid, colonization, and occupation of the Palestinian people," end quote. There are a few important whys to cover in regards to this story. We could ask, why target the film industry? The pledge answers by reading in part, quote, "As filmmakers, actors, film industry workers, and institutions, we recognize the power of cinema to shape perceptions," end quote. And of course, the why we care. The campaign's new pledge follows an increasing number of film industry actions in support of Palestine. Protests occurred at the Venice International Film Festival last month and at the Toronto International Film Festival this week. We heard that 2 artists have also withdrawn from a Smithsonian symposium. Lingen and Unanga artist Nicholas Galanin and Mexican-American sculptor Margarita Cabrera withdrew from the scheduled for September 12th symposium at the Smithsonian American Art Museum under allegations that the institution's decision to make the event private effectively censored participants amid ongoing institutional pressure from the Trump administration. A spokesperson for the museum explained that the symposium was meant to gather 14 speakers to discuss research presented in the show The Shape of Power: Stories of Race and American Sculpture, in which Cabrera and Galanin are featured, on the date of the show's closing. However, The Shape of Power was named in Trump's first executive action targeting the Smithsonian as an example of what he called, quote, "inherently harmful and oppressive," end quote, content, suggesting in that order that race is a, quote, "biological reality," end quote, echoing racist pseudoscientific beliefs. Still, the spokesperson denied any censorship, quote, "Because not all participants consented to being recorded, the decision was made not to document in this manner, including on social media," end quote. All the same, and the why we care here, the artist said that the Smithsonian's decisions to not list the event in its online spaces, as well as to make the symposium a private event accessible only to, quote, "a curated guest list," end quote, plus the ban on recording the event and sharing it on social media, were all methods of silencing participants during a period of Trump attacks on the institution. And we know for a fact, honeys, that these decisions were at least Trump connected, if not motivated, because, according to Hyperallergic, quote, "A person with knowledge of the symposium's planning told our team, on the condition of anonymity, that the decision to make the event invite only was made in order to protect the museum and speakers from further targeting by the Trump administration," end quote. Headlines also announced last week that the Rhodes family, which has owned the School of Visual Arts in New York for nearly 80 years, transferred ownership to the SVA Alumni Society, a nonprofit that has funded student scholarships since 1972, on September 1st. In a press release, the school's longtime president, David Rhodes, promised that, quote, "day-to-day life for students, administration, faculty, and staff would not change," end quote. The SVA, founded in 1947 as the Cartoonists and Illustrators School, enrolls around 6,000 under and graduate students, and its notable alumni include some of today's most important artists like Sol LeWitt, Lorna Simpson, Sarah Say, Andrea Fraser, Keith Haring, Cause. But what we want to keep an especially close eye on here is the fate of the SVA Faculty United, the school's union, which is working under the aegis of United Auto Workers and which formed in May of this year. They have recently elected a bargaining committee whose initial bargaining surveys from members will inform its first contract negotiations. And speaking of unions, workers at the New York Foundation for the Arts announced their intent to form a union on September 10th, citing a lack of transparency within the organization and the need for higher wages, among other grievances. About 20 total part-time and full-time employees are eligible to join the new union. The foundation itself was established in 1971 to provide support and resources to artists and cultural workers. It says that it has distributed $55 million to nearly 1,000 artists since opening its doors. The proposed union would join with United Auto Workers 2110, which already represents cultural workers at institutions across the city. We've heard their name in connection to Beesness stories regarding the Guggenheim, the Met, the Brooklyn Museum employees. And in a step that represents one possible path to formal recognition, the workers filed a petition for an official union establishment election with the National Labor Relations Board on September 10th. The last week also saw a lot of unrest on the international scale. Our first story there is the closure of major French museums amid labor strikes. The Block Everything national protests held throughout France France last week also took place on new Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's first day in office, September 9th. He was appointed to the role only one day after former Prime Minister François Bayrou received a vote of no confidence on September 8th and the government collapsed. The Block Everything movement itself formed in response to a budget package put forth in July of this year by Bayrou, which would have reduced the country's fiscal deficit by roughly 44 billion euros or about 51.5 billion US dollars via austerity measures, quote, including the freezing of pension and welfare payments at 2025 amounts and the cancellation of 2 public holidays, end quote. Bayrou notably is now the 4th prime minister to be ousted from the government in less than 2 years, a fact that is likely a big headache for French President Emmanuel Macron. And as protesters flooded downtown areas, multiple cultural institutions and heritage spaces closed to protect their holdings. The Louvre was partially open the afternoon of September 10th, but the Musée d'Orsay, the Musée Delacroix, and the Arc de Triomphe all closed due to the strikes, while others, according to the French union CGT Culture, saw their entrances blocked by about 100 protesters. An example of that was the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And this is really where the unions come in. 3 of them representing French cultural workers, CGT, FSU, and SUD, stated that they were protesting in a bid for, quote, social and fiscal justice, an increase in salaries, pensions, and minimum social benefits, and a real cultural public policy that will do away with inequality, social and cultural divisions, end quote, among other results. The French publication Le Monde reported that 145 arrests were made by noon of September 10th. Also highly publicized last week was the destruction of the historic Singha Durbar Palace as protests in Nepal turned deadly. Nepal's youth gathered September 8th to denounce their government's alleged corruption as well as newly imposed social media bans with peaceful protests and following similar unrest in Bangladesh and Indonesia. However, the Nepalese youth were met with violent force by police, resulting in the deaths of 22 people, most of them reportedly young anti-government activists, and the injuries of hundreds more. Police used live ammunition, water cannons, and tear gas against the protesters, many of whom reportedly were still wearing their school uniforms. Across the next few days, protesters, angered by this escalation, disregarded a police curfew, ransacked and set fire to Nepal's public institutions, historic landmarks, and private businesses, including Singha Durbar, the historic 1908 palace complex that has served as the administrative hub of Nepal's government at various points in time. Security forces, including the army, have been deployed to maintain order as Nepal's government scrambles to restore stability. Hyperallergic writes, quote, in a televised statement, Nepal Army Chief Ashok Raj Sigdel said that the priority now is to, quote, normalize the present difficult situation and protect our historical and our national heritage and public as well as private property, and to ensure safety to the general public and diplomatic missions, and all quotes. We care about this story, honeys, because the effect of being limited in connection and communication by this political force, this ban, is having on these youth factions is serious and a root cause of the problem. Say our sources, quote, for a generation that grew up connected to the broader world, the attempt to silence them through the digital ban only deepened their determination to be heard. Many demonstrators view this as not just a fight over social media, but also a reckoning with decades of broken promises, end quote. The growing unrest has prompted the resignation of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and has ramped up political tensions within the nation. Furthermore, honeys, the number and scale of arsons have led to fierce debate online even between the protesters, many of whom are condemning the violence and insist their movement seeks accountability and reform, not destruction and vandalism. Some protesters have even positioned themselves outside notable cultural sites, for example, the historic building of the Department of Archaeology and the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Bhaktapur, holding signs pleading for the preservation of these landmarks. In surprising reports from Monday, Christie's has also reportedly closed its digital art department. A Christie spokesperson had stated the company made a, quote, strategic decision to reformat digital art sales, end quote, to selling digital art within the larger category of 20th and 21st century art. This decision is so surprising because it comes just beyond the 4-year anniversary of the Christie's sale of Beeple's Every Day's the First 5,000 Days 2021, which set the record for the highest price achieved by a digital artwork at $69.3 million. That auction was the house's first NFT sale and is widely credited with igniting the 2021 through 2022 NFT boom. Last week also saw the appearance of a Banksy mural of a judge beating a protester, which was promptly removed by the British court's service. The newest mural portrayed a judge in a wig and robes, raising a gavel high above his head and looming over a cowering protester poster holding a blood-splattered placard. It quickly drew attention after it was painted on an outer wall of the Royal Courts of Justice in London on September 8th, especially as the complex is, quote, considered one of the most secure locations in Britain, end quote, according to the New York Times. Very soon after Banksy posted images of the mural to his Instagram account, the piece was covered over and guarded by security officers, and on the morning of September 10th, a masked man was filmed scrubbing the image off the wall while two police officers stood nearby. What remains, according to our sources, is a, quote, shadowy stain eerily reminiscent of a hooded Grim Reaper wielding a scythe that has captured widespread attention in its own right, end quote. Locals interviewed by The Guardian said Banksy's image was a clear reference to the mass detainment of almost 900 people at a demonstration against the banning of the protest group Palestine Action, which took place in London on September 6th. And this headline caught our attention because of the whys of its removal, the impact of it being removed. A spokesperson for Britain's Ministry of Justice told New York Times via email that the work had been destroyed because the royal courts are a protected building under British heritage laws and that the court's service was, quote, obligated to maintain its original character, end quote. But the response by many, especially in online forums, indicates the mural's erasure has become part of the artwork itself, quote, serving as an apt metaphor for the widespread government crackdowns on protests for Palestine around the world, end quote, in our sources' words. The Good Law Project, the legal organization that filmed the mural's removal and also opposed the ban of Palestine Action, posted images of this process on social media asking, quote, silencing a work of art about silencing protest? Maybe it was a little too close to home, end quote. For many, Banksy's image, or the shadow now that remains of it, is a visual reminder of the enduring spirit of civil resistance. And to bring us back up a little bit here at the end of the episode, honeys, a new poll shows growing support for the Parthenon marbles' return to Greece. 56% of those polled said they would opt for returning the marbles to Athens when the British Museum launches its forthcoming renovation this year, versus 53% in a similar survey held last year. Another poll commissioned by JL Partners for the Parthenon project found that almost 1 in 3 individuals, British individuals, said they want all looted and controversial artworks kept in the UK to be restituted. We will see if this has any impact on the works' future locations. That's all I've got for you this week, honeys. I hope you enjoyed the buzz. I hope you're staying hydrated and enjoying the last little bit of summer we're having right now. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk soon via our full length dropping Thursday and next Tuesday's Beesness. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.